Good morning, everyone. This is Michael Robbins, substituting for Tulia Robbins, who usually does these Ask programs, at least most of them. And this morning, we are working with the book, The Destiny of the Nations. And this is part of the series in which we talk about the soul and personality relationships between in the various nations of the world, and focus also on your particular nation so that you can be useful in helping to invoke the soul of your nation and have it express through the personality of your nation. In this Ask series of programs, we have the AM time operating this week, 5 a.m. GMT, or Universal Time. And as we know, Wednesdays are the Triangles Day, Thursday, the Reappearance of the Christ, Friday, a webinar on the dissipation of clamor. Then we continue with the broadcasts. There are 4 broadcasts in one webinar. This is Saturday, and so we're dealing with the invocation of the soul of nations, and then on Sundays we deal with the attraction of money for hierarchical purposes. Now, what I'm going to do is read a little bit from the Destiny of the Nations. It's a wonderful book giving us an idea of the entity, or the entities we call nations, and how they can best express in harmony and unity and through themselves carry out the divine plan. I have here some discussion of the 6th and 7th ray. I'll be hopping around in this book, not reading it from cover to cover, but important parts of the book. So I'll just begin and make some commentary as we go. First, we're going to deal with the 6th ray and then contrast it with the 7th ray, because that's what's really causing tremendous turbulence in the world at this time. And so the Tibetan says, to understand a little the problem involved in the differing modes of work which characterize those who worked in the past under the influence of the 6th ray, and those who are learning to work under the influence of the incoming 7th ray, it might be helpful if we compared very briefly the two systems of activity. And I would ask you to remember that both systems and modes of work are equally right in their time and place. Well, we know we are leaving the age of Pisces, which has been operative more or less for 2,500 years, and with which the 6th ray presence coincided. It's not always the way, because any other ray might coincide with a particular equinoctial age. But we're entering the age of Aquarius, and the 7th ray will coincide with that 2,500-year period. Actually, it'll be a much longer period, because the greater age of Aquarius is the prospect for all of us. When exactly it begins, we don't know, but within the next few centuries, I would say. So he says here that whichever system it may be, they are equally correct in their time and place, but that the modern disciple should be discarding the old methods. And that's often hard to do, because we've been trained in it for so many centuries, and steadily learning to employ the new and more modern and effective modes of work. And I assume the Tibetan will mean that these are modes of work which correlate with that very skillful ray, that ray of skill in action, the 7th ray. This he must learn to do optimistically and with assurance, knowing that the benefits and experience gained under the 6th ray system of discipline is still his most precious possession. We can rely upon it, is what he's saying. It's so built into us because it has been transmuted from method and mode into characteristics and established habits. We are accustomed to it, and whatever our rays may be, we've certainly been, well, the great majority of people have been reincarnating during the past 2,000 years. Excuse me. Reincarnating during the past 2,000 years, and, probably quite a number of times. So these six-ray modes have become established characteristics and habits. It is the new ways of working and the new forces, you see, it's a Uranian ray, this seventh ray, and Uranus is always bringing in the new methods. It's the new ways of working and the new forces and objectives which the disciple of this present era has to master. And we're not there yet. The full and true and complete age of Aquarius, which is uninfluenced by Pisces and the sixth ray, is not yet with us. So maybe by the year 2117, the Tibetans suggest that all those other influences will really be out of the way. And yet they will have been built into us, and we can rely upon them. He must do this relying upon the lessons learnt in the past, and must base his new structure of truth upon the foundations and the stabilized orientations which must now be established. So we have in front of us a task of learning how to work in a new way, and there's really, well, hardly anyone who's working completely in this new way, who's truly a developed Aquarian. The time is not yet, and we are in that turbulent period when the changes between the sixth and the seventh ray are occurring, and one is pulling backwards and the other is moving forward, and we have the rough water, the rapids, so to speak, and it's hard to make a passage through that without overturning your little boat. The first step for the sincere aspirant is at this point to stop for a moment to inquire and discover whether he is working primarily under the sixth ray impulse or the seventh ray influence. Just pause for a moment and just think about that sentence. Is it the sixth ray impulse or the seventh ray influence which is working in your life? What do you think, regardless of what your rays may be? Well, this is a question that we can consistently address to ourselves. We don't have to come up with a complete answer right now. And he's noticed that the words were impulse and influence. And he says, I use these words impulse and influence deliberately because they describe the general effect of the two functioning energies. Now, we know the sixth ray is very impulsive. It is very closely connected with the planet Mars, and it oftentimes acts before it thinks deeply and thoroughly about what is going on. The seventh ray is much more measured. It's connected with the will, with self-discipline. It has a Uranian quality to it, but it's also related to Saturn, which is the ruler of all the seventh planes, whether it's the cosmic physical plane, which is the seventh cosmic plane, or whether we're dealing with the systemic planes. It's dealing with physicality and caution in all manifestational matters. Upon one thing, says the Tibetan, all disciples and aspirants can rely, and this is the basic and enduring effect of all the sixth-ray potencies which have been established during the past 2,000 years. This is really second nature to us, and it's really helped humanity ascend in its objectives from normal desire to those types of higher desires which we call aspirations. There's a large number at this moment of sixth ray personalities and also six-ray souls, and they carry the influence of that previous age and ray cycle with them. So anyway, this basic and enduring effect, these must be counted upon, says the Tibetan, offset and understood. In other words, we can't run away with the six-ray show anymore. They have to be offset and balanced. And there's a peculiar place in the Tibetan's writings where he says, he talks monadically, and he says that the only the only group of people that will have difficulty responding to the new seventh ray influence are the sixth ray monads. Well, they're basically out of harmony with the seventh ray methods. I found that a very interesting kind of statement. So anyway, these tendencies have to be offset and understood, and the newer influence must then be studied. And we are doing that, are we not, here in the Tibetan's work? The newer methods investigated and mastered. Notice how the fifth ray is getting involved here with study and investigation, and the seventh ray and the first ray, the rays of mastery. And the new ideas and idealisms must be brought through into objectivity. It will not be that we will not have an idealistic age. The ideals will simply be different and more inclined to bring heaven to earth. We do know that Aquarius is, after all, an idealistic sign. So the new ideas and idealism, must be brought through into objectivity and so expressed in a new way. Only thus can the new civilization and culture be wisely and sanely produced, and the foundations laid for the development of the human family along right lines during the coming era. And notice that word sane. Sometimes the sixth ray runs away with itself and gets so impassioned and fanatical about its objectives that we could question the sanity of its procedures. This will not be the case with the seventh ray, which is an eminently sane and practical type of ray. It will be of value, therefore, to compare the old and the new ways of discipline and of training, of attribute and quality, of method and objectives. So that's what the Tibetan is about to do. It's a very important section. Let's just take a little bit. It's going to take a while. It's going to take some number of weeks before we can really do this, and it won't necessarily be every week that we'll be doing it. So while Tuya and I are up here north of the Arctic Circle, we'll try to make some headway in this particular process, and then when we get back to the south, we'll be working again on invoking the soul of particular nations. The outstanding characteristic, says the Tibetan, of the disciple and aspirant under the old regime was devotion. Now, devotion can be a very good thing. The soul has great devotion to the divine plan, and the monad is called a lord of ceaseless and persevering devotion. So when we see that word, we need not run the other way, thinking that it only represents the old. We have to preserve the idea of devotion and express it in the right way according to the divine plan. The Tibetan goes on, the race had, of necessity, to achieve a different and right orientation to the world of spiritual values. The sixth ray lifts you up with its aspiration toward the higher spiritual values, and hence the effort of the hierarchy during the past 20 centuries, he's generalizing here, was to lay the emphasis upon the realm of religious values, especially when the Piscean influence was so very strong. The world religions have held the center of the stage for several thousand years in an effort to make humanity seek one-pointedly for the soul, and thus prepare itself for the emergence of the fifth kingdom of nature. Now, there are all kinds of ray cycles, and just because we're going beyond a type of ray cycle which has affected humanity, we cannot forget that we are in the midst of a larger fourth ray cycle the sixth ray part of which will last another 21,000 years. So we're not by any means finished with this sixth ray or done with the quality of devotion, but it will be on a larger scale, perhaps more in a planetary sense. Okay, well anyway, the emergence of the fifth kingdom of nature, that's what we're all trying to do as we work towards the first initiation, which when it is taken, when the Christ appears, let's say, reappears, it will indicate that that initiation is taken. So this is stated, or slated, if I might use such a specialized word, to come into manifestation during the imminent Aquarian age. The fifth kingdom of nature will emerge in humanity and on the planet during the next 2,500 years approximately. These equinoctial ages last 2,160 years approximately, or more precisely, but the Tibetan oftentimes uses 2,000 or 2,500 to generalize. So this age of Aquarius, will be predominantly the age of worldwide discipleship. Think of that. Humanity is already the disciple in a way, and humanity as an initiate is beginning to emerge, leading later to the age of universal initiation in Capricorn times. Amazing thought. So if we work well during the next 2,000 years, we will have a Capricornian time when the third degree will be quite prominent, and certainly the first and second degree will be taken by so many. It will be the age of universal initiation. Therefore, the great world religions have held authoritative sway for a very long time. Their peculiar tenets, adapted to specific nation, race, or time, embodied some truth through the medium of some particular teacher, who attracted to himself individuals throughout the world who were spiritually minded, because he, that teacher, expressed for them the highest goals towards which they could possibly strive. I mean, we think about particularly the Buddha and the Christ as the greatest of all the hemispheric teachers. All the world religions have thus been built around an embodied idea in other words, the teacher is an embodied idea, who, in his own person, expressed the immediate ideal of the time and age. He demonstrated certain divine attributes and concepts which it was necessary to present to the vision of the sons of men as their possible and immediate goal. And there have been many wonderful lesser teachers along these lines as well, all oriented towards this high ideal, this uplifting possibility, which is lifting humanity away from ordinary desire. This was most necessary. And you can understand how Pisces in the sixth ray would allow that, or promote that. In these manifestations, as I have earlier pointed out, the sixth ray influence can easily be seen. And this time, note, he calls it an influence and not just an impulse. When, however, an individual sixth ray influence can be noted in an era wherein the sixth ray is uniquely active, then the reason for the potency of the religious idea as expressed in theological dogma and doctrine and the universal authority of the churches can be seen. We've had a very religious age. Of course, we've been moving away from that, but there are some groups that are still in a somewhat rear guard action, you might say, and they are still emphasizing the tremendous fanatical idealism which in the West was more prominent during medieval times. Well, I think we see how we have started here, and I'm trying to think, shall we, I'll read one more paragraph, and then we'll go on to our reflection. The orientation of man to the world of higher values. Now let's listen to that carefully. The orientation of man to the world of higher values has been the main objective of the Piscean age which is ending now, and of the sixth ray influence, which is so rapidly passing out. Now, basically, the Tibetan pretty well let us know that by the year 2125, let's say, that sixth ray influence would be completely gone. He even talks about it being gone by the end of the century. And the Piscean era, too, he speaks in the same way. It will be gone by the end of this century, or certainly by 2125. But, you know, our monad is on a plane which has a lot to do with Pisces, and that's the highest part of our nature, because we are we go forth from the Father's home, and turning back we save. You will recognize that as the Pisces mantram, spiritual mantram. Though there has never been a time when this basic orientation has not been going forward, you know, steadily, the elevation of our values, it is a value to bear in mind that during the past 2,000 years, a much higher, rarer, and more difficult process of orientation has been held before the race, and for the following reason. So our idealism has really been promoted during the past 2,000 years. It's a general trend, but a deliberate elevation has been occurring in a most intense manner during the last 2,000 years. The fourth kingdom in nature has been definitely attracted upwards towards the emerging fifth kingdom, the kingdom of souls. And this has made necessary also the shift of attention away from the three worlds of human endeavor and expression into the higher world of soul consciousness. Now this is a plus and a minus, because under the sixth ray we may very well ignore the three worlds of human endeavor and simply think that heaven is the way to go. Now this will be corrected by the balancing effect of the incoming seventh ray. It has necessitated likewise the refocusing of the instinctual and intellectual attention, which are the main factors in the unfoldment of divine awareness. So spiritual instinct, intellectual interest in spirituality, not just in the lower three worlds. These have been emphasized. The awareness can be instinctual, intellectual, and therefore human, and also spiritual. But all three are equally divine, and this is a point often forgotten. So we've been dealing with the first objective of sixth ray disciples, and hopefully we'll be able to continue this contrasting of the sixth and seventh ray. So this is the end of our readings for this particular session. End of, well, what shall we call it? Invocation of the souls of nations. Invocation of the souls, let's spell correctly, souls of nations. And today is the 17th of September, and we'll be coming back to this in about a week. Okay, friends, now with the idea in the back of our mind that we have two largely different methods of working in these turbulent times, we will get on to our little reflection about our role in these processes. Remembering as we do this that linking up with your triangle or triangles and having the sense of participating in your own little network is very important, and always relating it to the larger network. Keep that in your mind during the day. And it can flash upon your consciousness at different times, and the sense of helping to transform the etheric network into a network of triangles to help make this a sacred planet that can enter your consciousness at odd moments, and you can participate in just a flash. And of course, all the work we're doing in this Ask series of invocations is meant to be in cooperation with the great Lord Maitreya, who is the head of the spiritual hierarchy. So focus on the great Lord for a moment and the way that He is guiding all of these processes of human improvement. And as we reflect upon improving the national and international work, we think of Lord Maitreya and we gather in His name. So we shall say this mantra as you see on your screen. We have gathered in your name, Lord Maitreya, be with us. No matter how we work along what ashramic line, and there are 7, no matter how we work for the improvement of humanity, if we are working for the improvement of humanity, we are working with Lord Maitreya. And remember that as you seek to bring forth the soul in your own nation, and thinking more broadly, the soul of humanity through all the nations, you are going to be working predominantly under the influence of one of the planetary centers. It will be London for the group that used to be the British Empire. There are a number of countries there that work along the second ray line, interestingly. Canada, Australia, New Zealand. There are others. Or Geneva, through which a very pure type of second ray force is operating, and this is working through Europe and through Russia and probably through those countries that used to be members of the Soviet Union. So that's on the border, Geneva, Switzerland, right on the border of France. And then New York, a strong 6th ray impulse, planetarily considered, and it's for the Western Hemisphere. And maybe some of you are working also in relation to Tokyo and Darjeeling. These 2 centers have yet to emerge in greater power, especially Darjeeling, which carries a very high spiritual first-ray force, regardless of what the rays of the particular city might be. They're different in a number of cases from the planetary function. So think about the spiritual inlet, one of the 5, through which you are working in a way which is influencing your nation. Think about that for a moment. the nations of the world will be coming under one of these 5 planetary centers. So we've been, last 3 weeks, thinking about the soul of your nation, the personality of your nation, and the way they cooperate, or should cooperate together. Let us do that again now. You are a disciple. You are a worker for the divine plan. What's meant to happen in your nation as the soul tries to express through its personality nature, and how can you help? That's our little meditation for the moment. And you may not be in the political field, but still, in whatever type of service you do, you are somehow helping the soul of your nation to emerge, and in a larger sense, the soul of humanity. So you should have at least one way, one clear method by which your actions are contributing to what you consider to be the soul quality of your nation, which must express through its personality. So do your best when you think of the service you are offering. Try to realize that it really does play into the development of the causal body of your nation. Now, we know that when the causal body of a nation is sufficiently developed, and of course they are just like people in a way, they're at all different stages of development, when the causal body is sufficiently developed, that nation will be able to have its own esoteric school, bringing through the hierarchical teaching and leading people to the possibility of initiation. So, by serving in your nation with an idea of what the nation is meant to bring forward, you are definitely helping to build the causal body of your nation. And someday you might assess where you think that causal body is. You know, are the petals of sacrifice really working? It'd be a rare thing, because nations tend not to be sacrificial except in times of great distress and war. But I think that in some of the discipleship-tending nations of the world, those sacrifice petals are opening. So how does your service contribute to this unfoldment? So always keep in mind your relation to your own nation and to the nations of the world. And the key thing here, as we see in the image, is that the great Lord, Lord Maitreya, is meant to express his energy through all the nations. And we spend a moment visualizing this radiation of light and love and the will to good coming through him to all the nations and the people, the souls of those nations. Because that is the way it will be when he reappears, and during his many centuries with us, his influence will permeate everything. Our lives in the various incarnations we will have, and the nations of the world. Now remember too that we're in the middle of the expressive period of Virgo. We've just had the Virgo full moon. And this is Christ in you, the hope of glory. The way of bringing the soul into expression through the personality, and that's what we're talking about when we speak of the nations. So do your best to bring that soul, your own soul, into expression through your personality and through all of the material aspects of your personality. And eventually, if enough of us do this, this will affect the nations in which we live. Thank you, everyone. For attending our little reflection and discussion about the souls of nations. And we will continue our work in the Ask program. Ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be open to you. Tomorrow evening, or rather, it's not evening, it'll be morning, tomorrow morning for us anyway, maybe evening for some of you, we'll continue with the attracting money for hierarchical purposes. And remember, we're in the period of the Virgo full moon. This is the time of distribution, these 3 days. I am the mother and the child, I God, I matter am, and Christ in you, the hope of glory. So let's stay aligned and use these energies to bring forward the divine plan in the particular place where we are working at this time. We'll have a few more slides and the Om will sound, and then farewell, and we'll see you